It was a quiet evening, the kind where everything feels a little too perfect. The house was clean, the kids were asleep, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. I had just settled into my chair, flipping through the news on my phone, when Sarah, my wife of 10 years, walked into the room. She looked calm, but there was something in her eyes, a strange mixture of guilt and determination. "Bill," she said, her voice unnervingly steady, "sit down. We need to talk." The way she said it froze me in place for a moment. There was no warmth, no softness in her tone. I set my phone down slowly, trying to read her expression. My first instinct was to panic. Was something wrong with the kids? Had something happened to her family? But her next words caught me completely off guard. "There's something I need to tell you," she continued, sitting down across from me. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles turning white. "I've been seeing someone else." I blinked, stunned into silence. For a moment, the words didn't register. Seeing someone else? What did she mean? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. But when her eyes met mine, the weight of her confession hit me like a freight train. "You're cheating on me?" The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, shaky, incredulous. She nodded, and I could see the corners of her mouth twitch as if she was trying to keep her face neutral, but her guilt was written all over her. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, as if that would somehow soften the blow. "It just happened. I didn't plan for it." I swear, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I had built a life with, the mother of my 2 kids, was sitting there, calmly admitting that she had been unfaithful. My hands gripped the armrests of my chair as I tried to process her words. But instead of exploding in anger, instead of breaking down into tears, I did something that surprised even me. I smiled. Not a big, happy smile, of course. It was more like the kind of smile you get when something so absurd happens that your brain can't compute it. A small, bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "You're joking, right?" I said, though I already knew she wasn't. Her face hardened. "I'm not joking, Bill. This is serious. I've been struggling with this for a long time, and I couldn't keep it a secret anymore." I wanted to laugh harder, to burst out with the kind of wild, unhinged laughter that comes when everything feels too surreal to be real. But instead, I held it back, forcing myself to focus on her. "Struggling?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You're telling me you've been struggling while sneaking around behind my back?" "It wasn't like that," she snapped, her calm facade cracking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I wasn't happy, Bill. And he made me feel something I hadn't felt in years." My stomach churned at her words. He. Of course, there was a he. Someone who had apparently swooped in and given her whatever it was she thought I couldn't. I clenched my jaw, the bitter taste of betrayal filling my mouth. "So, who is he?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "Since you're so eager to share, why don't you tell me everything?" She hesitated, her eyes darting away for a moment before she finally answered. "His name is James. He's someone from work." Of course, it was someone from work. The cliché stung more than the betrayal itself. I had always trusted Sarah when she said she needed to stay late at the office or attend those team-building weekends. Never once had I suspected she was lying. "How long?" I asked, my voice quieter now, almost numb. 6 months, she admitted, her gaze fixed on the floor. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of pretending everything was fine while she carried on an affair right under my nose. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind flashed back to all the little moments I had ignored. Her sudden obsession with her appearance, the late nights, the guarded phone. The signs had been there all along, but I had been too blind, too trusting to see them. "I don't even know what to say," I said finally, leaning back in my chair. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what my life had just turned into. "You've been lying to me for 6 months, and now you're sitting here, expecting what? Forgiveness?" "I don't know what I expect," she said quietly, her voice breaking for the first time. I needed to tell you the truth." I laughed again, a short, bitter sound. "The truth? That's rich, coming from you. Where was the truth 6 months ago, Sarah? Where was the truth when you looked me in the eye and told me you loved me? She flinched at my words but didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. I need some air, I said, heading for the door. We'll talk about this later. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, my mind raced with questions. What was I supposed to do now? How could I even begin to pick up the pieces of what she had just shattered? One thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But what Sarah didn't know was that I wasn't going to let her dictate how this ended. If she wanted a confession, she'd get one. But she'd also learn that actions have consequences, and she wouldn't see them coming. I stood outside for what felt like an eternity, staring up at the night sky, trying to make sense of everything. The stars twinkled indifferently above me, as if mocking the chaos unfolding in my life. The cold air stung my skin, but it couldn't numb the burning anger and humiliation that boiled inside me. 6 months. 6 months of lies, deceit, and betrayal. And the worst part? She sat there as if her confession somehow absolved her. As if admitting to her affair meant I should pat her on the back for her honesty and move on like nothing had happened. No, this wasn't something I could just move on from. This wasn't something I could forgive. When I finally went back inside, Sarah was still sitting in the same spot on the couch. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. But I wasn't moved. Not anymore. Are you done crying? I asked, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Her tears only made me angrier. Because we're going to talk now, Sarah. And this time, I want real answers. She wiped her face and nodded, her lips trembling. Okay, she whispered. I sat down across from her, making sure there was as much distance between us as possible. Let's start with the basics, I said. How did this happen? How did you go from being my wife to being whatever you are now? She flinched at my words, but didn't try to defend herself. It wasn't planned, she said softly. James and I, we worked on a project together. We spent a lot of time talking, and I don't know, it just happened. It just happened? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. That's your explanation? You talked, and suddenly you were sleeping with him? Give me a break, Sarah. She bristled at my tone, and for the first time, I saw a flash of anger in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she snapped. I didn't plan this, Bill. I didn't wake up one day and decide to ruin our marriage. No, you just decided to lie to my face for 6 months, I shot back. To sneak around behind my back while I was here, taking care of the kids, thinking we were happy. Her anger fizzled out as quickly as it came, and she looked down at her hands. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. But you did, Sarah. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we had. I leaned forward, my voice steady but laced with bitterness. You say you didn't mean for this to happen, but you made a choice. Every text you sent him, every time you lied to me, every time you went to see him, that was a choice. So don't sit there and tell me it just happened. She didn't respond, and the silence stretched between us again. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. Really apologize. Not the empty platitudes she'd been offering all night. But instead, she said something that nearly knocked the wind out of me. I wasn't happy, Bill, she said quietly, her eyes finally meeting mine. For a long time, I felt like we've been more like roommates than a married couple. And James, he made me feel alive again. I stared at her, stunned. You weren't happy? I repeated, my voice rising. And instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to cheat? That's your solution? I didn't know how to fix it, she admitted, tears streaming down her face again. I didn't want to hurt you. I felt so lost. You didn't want to hurt me? I said, laughing bitterly. Do you even hear yourself, Sarah? Do you realize how insane that sounds? You didn't want to hurt me, so you betrayed me, lied to me, broke our family apart? I know I messed up, okay, she cried. I know I've ruined everything, but I still love you, Bill. I want to fix this. I want us to be a family again. Her words made me laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed through the room. You want to fix this? I said, shaking my head. You think we can just go back to the way things were? Sarah, there's no fixing this. You killed it. She looked at me, her face crumpling with despair, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. I didn't need her anymore. I didn't want her. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let her dictate how this ended. I stood up, grabbing my coat. I need some space, I said, my voice cold. Don't wait up for me. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of freedom. Sarah's confession had shattered the illusion of the life we had built together, but it had also given me something I hadn't realized I needed. A chance to start over. What I didn't know was that Sarah wasn't going to let me go that easily. The fallout was only just beginning. When I returned home the next morning, I expected Sarah to be subdued, maybe still crying or trying to come up with some desperate apology. But as I walked through the door, what I saw made my blood boil. She wasn't broken. She wasn't even remorseful. She was on the phone, laughing. She turned her back when she heard me walk in, lowering her voice, but I could still catch snippets of her conversation. No, he's just being dramatic, she said casually, as if my entire world hadn't just been ripped apart. I told him the truth. What more does he want? I slammed the door behind me, and her head whipped around. She quickly ended the call, stuffing her phone into her pocket. Oh, you're back, she said, her tone too calm for someone who had just confessed to cheating. Who was that? I asked, my voice sharp. Was that him? James. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with guilt before settling into a look of defiance. That's none of your business. None of my business? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You destroy our marriage, and now you're going to play the victim? Who was it, Sarah? Fine, she snapped. Yes, it was James. He was checking on me because, unlike you, he actually cares about how I feel. Her words hit like a slap in the face. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my temper in check. You've got some nerve, I said, my voice low. Do you even hear yourself? You're standing in our home, where our kids sleep, defending the man you cheated on me with. I'm not defending him, she shot back. I'm just saying that maybe if you'd been paying more attention to me, I wouldn't have needed him in the first place. That was it. The final straw. You don't get to blame me for this, I said, my voice rising. You made this choice, Sarah. You lied. You cheated. And now you're trying to make it my fault? She crossed her arms, glaring at me. You think you're perfect, Bill? You think you're some saint? You're not. You've been so checked out of this marriage, so focused on work and the kids, that you stopped seeing me as a person. I was lonely. Lonely? I shouted. You had a family, Sarah. You had a husband who loved you, kids who adored you, and you threw it all away because you were lonely? That's your excuse? Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care anymore. I couldn't care. You want to know what's funny? I said, my voice shaking with anger. Last night, I actually felt sorry for you. I thought maybe, just maybe, you were telling me the truth. But now? Now I see you for who you really are. Her tears turned into full-blown sobs, but I didn't stay to watch. I grabbed my keys and left the house again, needing space to think. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing with everything she had said. How had we come to this? How had the woman I loved turned into someone I didn't even recognize? By the time I returned home that evening, I had made up my mind. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation. It wasn't going to be a quick fix. Sarah had broken something that couldn't be repaired, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. But when I walked through the door, the house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. My heart sank as I called out for her. Sarah? No answer. I walked upstairs to the bedroom and found a note on the bed. It was short, scrawled in her messy handwriting. If you're done running away, maybe you'll finally listen. I'm staying with a friend tonight. We need to talk about the kids. The kids. The thought of them being dragged into this mess made my stomach turn. Max and Emma were too young to understand what was happening, but I knew they could sense the tension. Sarah's selfishness wasn't just affecting me. It was affecting them too, and I wasn't going to let her use them as pawns in whatever twisted game she was playing. What I didn't know was that Sarah's idea of staying with a friend was another lie, and her next move would be even worse. I spent the night pacing the living room, replaying every word of Sarah's note in my mind. Staying with a friend felt like another slap in the face. Was this friend James? Or was she just using this as another excuse to avoid responsibility? Either way, I wasn't going to sit idly by while she played these games. The next morning, I got up early and called her phone. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. By the third attempt, it went straight to voicemail. Typical. She'd always been good at avoiding confrontation when it suited her. Frustrated, I decided to focus on the kids. I didn't want Max and Emma to feel the weight of what was happening between us. If Sarah wasn't going to be there for them, then I would. By noon, Sarah still hadn't returned my calls, and my patience was wearing thin. I texted her instead, "Where are you? We need to talk, and the kids need answers." An hour later, she finally replied, "I'll be home later tonight." Stop blowing up my phone, Bill. It's not helping. Not helping? The sheer arrogance of her response made my blood boil. But I bit my tongue. I couldn't let my anger get the better of me. Not yet. I needed to stay calm and strategic. The unexpected visit around 4 p.m. Just as I was getting ready to take the kids to the park, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I froze. Standing there was James. He was taller than I imagined, wearing a smug expression that made me want to punch him in the face. He held his hands up in mock surrender. "Relax, man. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just came to talk." "To talk?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You've got some nerve showing up here." "I thought it'd be better if we cleared the air," he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Look, Sarah told me everything. I know you're upset, and I get it. But this doesn't have to be ugly." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This guy, this homewrecker, was standing on my porch, acting like he was doing me a favor. "You know what's ugly?" I said, stepping closer to him. "The fact that you slept with another man's wife, and now think you can waltz in here and act like the good guy." He smirked, and I had to fight the urge to deck him right then and there. "I'm not trying to start a fight," he said smoothly. "I just think you should know that Sarah isn't happy. She hasn't been happy for a long time. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to her, this wouldn't have happened." That was it. I stepped forward, my fists clenched, but before I could do anything I'd regret, the kids ran into the room. "Dad, who's that?" Max asked, his curious eyes darting between James and me. James looked at Max, then back at me. "Right," he said, stepping back. "I'll leave. But think about what I said, Bill. This doesn't have to be a mess." He walked back to his car and drove off, leaving me standing there, seething. How dare he show up at my house, near my kids, and lecture me about my own marriage? The confrontation with Sarah. When Sarah finally came home that evening, I was ready. As soon as she walked through the door, I cornered her in the hallway. "You've got some explaining to do," I said, my voice cold. She sighed, dropping her purse on the floor. "I don't want to do this right now, Bill. I'm exhausted." "Oh, you're exhausted?" I snapped. "That must be so hard for you." Meanwhile, James decided to pay me a little visit today. Care to explain that? Her eyes widened in shock. "He came here? Why?" "You tell me," I said, crossing my arms. "He said he wanted to clear the air. He also made it very clear that you've been confiding in him about how unhappy you are. So why don't you explain why the man you've been sleeping with thinks he has the right to show up at my house?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, struggling to find the right words. "I didn't tell him to come here," she said finally. "He must have done that on his own." "Well, isn't that convenient?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've really got this whole thing worked out, don't you? You get to cheat, play the victim, and let him handle your dirty work." "Stop twisting this around," she shouted. "You don't know what it's been like for me, Bill. You don't understand." "I don't understand?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You're the one who lied, Sarah. You're the one who betrayed me. So don't you dare stand there and act like you're the victim in all of this." She looked at me, her eyes blazing with anger. "You think this is easy for me? I've been miserable for years, Bill, and you didn't even notice. You were too busy with work, with the kids, with everything but me. Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. You're right, Sarah, I said quietly. I didn't notice. I didn't notice because I was too busy holding everything together while you were busy tearing it apart. Her face crumpled, but I didn't wait for her response. I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her standing there in silence. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of Sarah's downward spiral, and she was about to drag me along with her. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Sarah didn't come down for breakfast, and the kids didn't seem to notice. Max and Emma were laughing over cereal, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between their parents. I wanted to keep it that way. By mid-morning, I decided to check on her. I knocked on the bedroom door, but there was no answer. When I pushed it open, I found her sitting on the bed, her phone in hand and her face pale. She looked up at me, startled, as if she hadn't expected me to walk in. "Who are you texting?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She hesitated, then sighed. "James." "Of course. What now?" I said, crossing my arms. "Is he helping you plan your next move?" "I told him to stay out of this," she said, her voice defensive. "He shouldn't have come here yesterday. That wasn't part of the plan." "Plan?" I repeated, narrowing my eyes. "What plan, Sarah?" She stood up, her face flushed with anger now. "The plan to figure out how we move forward, Bill. This marriage is over. You've made that clear. But we still have kids to think about." "And James is part of this plan?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. She didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "You know, Sarah, I didn't think it was possible for you to make this situation worse, but you just keep surprising me." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Like you've never made mistakes? Well, newsflash, Bill, this isn't all on me." I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. "You're right, Sarah. I'm not perfect, but I didn't destroy our marriage. That's on you." I turned to leave, but her next words stopped me in my tracks. "You're going to regret this," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You think you're in control, but you're not. I'll make sure of that." I turned back to her, my eyes narrowing. "Is that a threat?" She smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a chill down my spine. "It's a promise." I didn't take her seriously at first. I thought her words were just empty threats, the desperate ramblings of someone who had lost control. But I should have known better. Sarah wasn't the type to let things go quietly. It started with little things. Mutual friends stopped returning my calls. Coworkers gave me strange looks in the office. Then, one day, I got a call from my boss. "Bill," he said, his tone serious. "We need to talk." I went into his office, confused and a little uneasy. He closed the door behind me and gestured for me to sit down. "I got an email," he said, pulling up his computer. "From your wife." The blood drained from my face. "What did it say?" He turned the screen toward me, and my stomach dropped. The email was filled with accusations, claiming I was emotionally abusive, neglectful, and unfit to be a father. She painted herself as the victim, portraying me as some kind of monster. "This is serious, Bill," my boss said. "These kinds of accusations can't be ignored. I don't want to believe it, but we have to address it." I was furious. "None of this is true," I said firmly. "Sarah is trying to ruin my reputation because I left her after I found out she was cheating." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Look, Bill, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, but you need to clear this up. Fast." I left the office that day feeling like the walls were closing in. Sarah wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was trying to destroy me. That night, I called my lawyer. I told him everything about Sarah's threats, the email to my boss, and the lies she was spreading. He listened patiently, then gave me the advice I needed. "Document everything," he said. "Every conversation, every interaction. Don't give her any ammunition. And if she continues this smear campaign, we'll take legal action." I spent the next few days gathering evidence. I saved text messages, recorded phone calls, and compiled a timeline of events. I wasn't going to let Sarah's lies ruin my life. But Sarah wasn't done. She started showing up at the kids' school, claiming she had the right to take them home, even though we hadn't finalized custody arrangements yet. The school called me, concerned about her behavior, and I had to explain the situation to the principal. "She's trying to manipulate everyone," I said. "Please don't let her drag the kids into this." The principal assured me they would follow protocol, but it was clear that Sarah was willing to stoop to any level to get what she wanted. The breaking point came a week later. I was sitting at home, going through some paperwork, when there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, 2 police officers were standing there. "Mr. Bill Carter," one of them asked. "That's me," I said, my heart pounding. "We received a report from your wife, Sarah Carter, claiming you've been abusive and neglectful toward your children. We need to ask you some questions." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is insane," I said. "Sarah is lying. She's trying to ruin me because I left her." The officers looked at each other, then back at me. "We'll need you to come down to the station and make a statement." I spent the next 2 hours explaining everything, showing them the evidence I had gathered. By the time I was done, they seemed to believe me, but the damage was already done. Sarah had crossed a line, and now I had no choice but to fight back with everything I had. That night, as I tucked Max and Emma into bed, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let Sarah win. Not this time. Not ever. What happened next was something none of us could have predicted. The next morning, I woke up more determined than ever. Sarah's lies and manipulation had gone too far, and I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I had worked so hard to protect. My lawyer and I had already been preparing for the custody battle, but now, with the police visit fresh in my mind, it was time to escalate. First, I contacted the school and explained the situation in detail, providing them with copies of the legal documents my lawyer had prepared. The principal assured me that Sarah would not be allowed to pick up the kids without prior agreement. That was one less thing to worry about, but I knew she wouldn't stop there. I decided to get ahead of her smear campaign by contacting key people in my life, friends, coworkers, even my boss. I explained what was happening, showed them the evidence I had, and made it clear that Sarah was trying to manipulate everyone around me. To my relief, most of them believed me, but not everyone was on my side. A few mutual friends had already taken Sarah's side, buying into her lies about me being abusive and neglectful. It stung, but I realized that anyone willing to believe her without hearing my side of the story wasn't worth my time. The unexpected ally later that week, I received a call from someone I never expected to hear from, James. At first, I didn't want to pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Bill," he said, his voice hesitant, "I need to talk to you. In person. What could you possibly have to say to me?" I asked coldly. "It's about Sarah," he said. "Look, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but there's something you need to know." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. We met at a coffee shop, and I kept my guard up as he sat across from me, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. "What do you want, James?" I asked, my voice sharp. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah's been lying to me too," he said. "She told me you were this horrible, controlling husband who made her miserable. But the more I've gotten to know her, the more I've realized she's not who she pretends to be." I narrowed my eyes, not sure if I could trust him. "And why are you telling me this now?" "Because she's losing it," he said, lowering his voice. "She's been saying things, making plans to completely ruin you. She wants full custody of the kids, and she's willing to fabricate anything to get it." I stared at him, my anger bubbling to the surface. "And you're just now figuring this out? After 6 months of sneaking around with my wife?" He flinched but didn't argue. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Bill. I just thought you should know what you're up against. She's dangerous, and I'm done being a part of it." I didn't trust him, not completely, but his words confirmed what I already suspected. Sarah wasn't going to stop until she had torn my life apart. Armed with new information, I went back to my lawyer and laid everything on the table. We filed for an emergency custody hearing, citing Sarah's erratic behavior, false accusations, and attempts to manipulate the legal process. I also provided a written statement from James, detailing her lies and her plans to fabricate evidence against me. The hearing was tense. Sarah sat across the courtroom, her face a mask of anger and indignation. She tried to paint me as a controlling, unfit father, but my lawyer tore her arguments apart with the evidence we had gathered. When it was my turn to speak, I remained calm and focused, laying out the facts without resorting to anger. I talked about how I had been the primary caregiver for Max and Emma, how I had always put their needs first, and how Sarah's actions had jeopardized their sense of stability. The judge listened carefully, his expression neutral. When Sarah spoke, her argument sounded rehearsed and overly emotional, lacking the credibility needed to sway the court. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I was granted full custody of Max and Emma, while Sarah was given limited, supervised visitation. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was bittersweet. I knew the battle had taken its toll on everyone involved, especially the kids. As we left the courthouse, Sarah shot me a glare that could have melted steel. "You think you've won," she hissed. "This isn't over." But for the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. I looked her in the eye and said, "No, Sarah, it is over, and it's time you accept that." It's been 6 months since the court ruling, and life is finally starting to feel normal again. Max and Emma are thriving in the stable environment I've worked so hard to provide, and we've even started new traditions to help them adjust to our new reality. As for Sarah, her visits with the kids are few and far between. She still tries to stir up trouble now and then, but I've learned to focus on what really matters, my kids and our future. This experience has taught me more than I ever wanted to know about betrayal, resilience, and the strength it takes to rebuild after everything falls apart. But in the end, I'm proud of the life I've created for my kids and me. We're stronger now, and nothing Sarah does can take that away from us.